Hey, welcome to another episode of Modes. I'm Rachel Premack, your editorial director here at FreightWaves. And today we're talking about an interesting topic. Well, we're always talking about interesting topics, of course, but today we're talking about speed limiters, which is a proposed law in the trucking industry that says that 18-wheelers, truck drivers can really only drive under a certain limit. So that could be 65, 70, 75 miles an hour. The actual limit hasn't been announced yet. It's still a proposed rule through the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And as you could imagine, trucking safety advocates favor it, and a lot of truck drivers themselves do not agree with this law. They say that this law could actually make the roads more unsafe. And it's kind of an interesting trend we see in a lot of these trucking safety regulations. Truck drivers point out these sort of ways in which the industry is designed that would actually make these safety regulations not really do the job that they seem to be doing. So to help us unpack this a little bit, we've got Justin Martin, who is a social media coordinator here at FreightWaves. He's been a truck driver for many years. Justin, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I guess on the surface, it doesn't really make sense that a law that limits truck speed would make trucking and the roads generally more unsafe. I think generally we want people to be driving a little bit slower, especially if they're driving, 18,000 pound vehicle or 80,000 pound vehicles that you've got to brake. And obviously it takes longer to brake a heavier vehicle than a lighter vehicle. Can you explain a little bit about why speed limiters would make or could make roads more unsafe?
Yeah, the nice thing about talking about speed limiters is like it could be a universal. When you talk about other things that impact drivers, it's usually very insular. It's just whatever affects the drivers. But nobody likes being stuck behind two semis that are struggling to pass each other at 60, 65, whatever the speed limit is. If they're doing the same speed or one's barely creeping by. Now, imagine the frustration of that and then scale it all across the country. You're going to see rises in driver frustration, incidences of road rage, let alone just setting aside like the impact it's going to have on pay for truck drivers. I'm talking just as a general person traveling down the road, nobody wants to be stuck behind two semis that are struggling to pass each other.
Yeah, that's the kind of interesting thing about this law is that you can really, anyone who's ever driven on the highways, which I think is the majority of Americans, can pretty easily picture this issue. The other kind of interesting point that I saw in the University of Arkansas study, OOIDA's also referenced this, and OOIDA's the organization for owner-operators, truck drivers in the U.S., for those of you who are not familiar with this acronym. But basically, a lot of researchers and advocates for truck drivers have noted that there's a higher number of interactions among vehicles that increases the chances that an accident will happen if you have this huge differentiator in speed. So if regular automobiles are going 75 miles an hour, truck drivers are going 65 miles an hour, that can contribute to more accidents. And as someone who has driven a lot on I-94 in Detroit, I can definitely picture this because there's basically no speed limit for passenger drivers. It says 55, but most passenger vehicles are going, not me, of course, but most passenger vehicles are going 80 or 90 miles an hour. And then because you're so close to the Ambassador Bridge and, all of the industry and manufacturing in Detroit, there's a lot of trucks on the road too. So it causes I can imagine if we extrapolate this out into the entire US, where some vehicles are going 55, 60 miles an hour, other vehicles are going 75, 80, 90 an hour, which I don't think anyone should be going 90 miles an hour, to be clear. But I can imagine this would really increase the number of accidents. Tell us a little bit about your experience driving an 18-wheeler when everyone else around you is going at a completely different speed limit.
I would say, first of all, half the state of New Jersey would disagree with you on driving 90 miles an hour. But yeah, nobody wants semis barreling down the highway being reckless. Obviously, any driver that's behaving like that, the beauty of the times we live in now is literally everybody has a cell phone in their pockets or a dash cam on their car. So if someone's out there driving like a maniac, they're going to get caught. The days of like the cowboy stuff back in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, those are gone. Anytime somebody's acting like an idiot on the highways, there's going to be a viral video because of that. And same with the cars too. It's always a small minority of the drivers that are acting stupid. But these laws that are going to be applied universally, everyone's going to be bumped down to like the lowest common denominator. As far as driving alongside split speed limits, a lot of states have been getting rid of those lately. Ohio, I believe, just got rid of theirs last year. California is still has theirs. They were one of the worsts out there because if you're going up and down I-5, it's like 65 for cars and 55 for trucks. It's a major difference in speed.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I can imagine that would be very challenging as a truck driver to deal with these cars whizzing around you. And obviously a speed limiter would certainly make that experience more common. Another interesting thing about these laws is, especially, and we saw this with the electronic logging device mandate, certain fleets adopt these sorts of rules more quickly. Other fleets don't have these rules. So in the speed limiter example, large fleets, especially those represented by the American Trucking Associations, are going to be more likely to already have these speed limiter laws. They're already more likely to have vehicles that cannot exceed a certain speed. Whereas if you look at owner-operators, so independent truck drivers that equals about 300,000 or more truck drivers on the road, they have their own vehicle. They just follow state and federal and local laws. They're not beholden to the laws or the regulations or rules by their employer because they are their own employer. I guess, can you tell us a little bit about how these speed laws how you've noticed these laws and rules differ for who you work for as a truck driver?
Yeah, so the first carrier I drove for, they were a mega carrier. It was Schneider, and I believe at the time the trucks were governed at 62. Might have been 60. If you were a solo driver, they were 62, and if you were a team driver, the trucks were governed at like 65. Every once in a while, you might be lucky and you get a truck in the fleet that like sneaks by and hasn't been shut down. I know personally, I had one truck. It was a white International, and it was governed, I believe, at 70. So I was constantly getting like
Wow.
calls on my call comp saying, "Hey, what are you doing going to the thing?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's just I set my cruise and that's how it's running." When I left them, I drove for a guy who owned two trucks, and he didn't have anything governed. They just you ran as fast as you wanted, and that was kind of scary too because he's constantly trying to get me to do like runs that shouldn't be done, and I stayed with him for like a couple of months, and then the company after that was the Department of Defense contractor Green Valley, and believe their trucks were governed at 70. So it varies vastly, depending what company you're going with. But with those trucks, because they're based in California and you're going coast to coast, you're driving in states like Texas and out west where the speed limit is high enough where you can actually hit the higher end of those speed limiters.
So which states have, in your experience, have the lowest speed limits for trucks versus which states are a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more allowing of higher speeds?
Oh, Texas for sure. Texas has like the 80 mile an hour speed limit on I-10. Once you get
Wow.
west of all the until you get to like the New Mexico state line, it's just flat open. There's literally nothing to hit. And I believe Utah has like a 80 mile per hour speed limit.
Wow, I'm kind of surprised that Utah is so high considering it's pretty mountainous, not really it's not like that
For sure.
flat. There's a lot
In the mountain,
crazy weather.
yeah, in the mountain areas they bring that down. But once you're out in the prairie
Okay.
lands, it's flat open. There's literally nothing to. If you end up going off the road, you're just in some guy's cow pasture. You're not. There's not like another
Okay.
rock or a tree or something you're going to hit.
What states have the lowest speed limits for truck drivers?
Oh, the usual suspects. California, I believe Ohio. It was 60. It's been a long time since I drove through Ohio. But yeah, California was 55, so they were the lowest.
Okay. I believe in I-94 in Michigan it's 65. But anyway, it was funny what you said about different trucks. Basically, you sometimes you get a truck that is governed at 70 miles an hour. It's funny because I
Hmm.
know for the ELDs, if you have a truck that is pre 2000, you don't have to have this device that tracks
Yeah.
how many hours you're working. And quick primer for those who are not constantly talking and thinking about ELDs. In late December 2017, the federal government, or rather spring of 2018, the federal government began enforcing a law that said that truck drivers would need to have these electronic devices in their cabs, making sure that they follow federal working hours. So that means a 14-hour day and 11 hours of driving, and then 10 hours between those 14-hour days. And the thing about that is that a 14-hour day, 11 hours of driving, that's a really long amount of time. I don't think most people would say, yeah, truck drivers should work more than 14 hours. They should work more than 11 hours, or they should be going faster than 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. But it's kind of the way that the job is designed that you have to put in this many hours in order to, make a living. Um, yeah, like, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how this job is kind of set up that um, you have to be driving all the time. You have to really be on your feet, or not on your feet, but working all the time.
Yeah, so most drivers are paid by the mile, not the hour. So anything that's going to affect how many miles you can drive in a given day, that's a direct impact on the money you're bringing home at the end of the week. So when the ELDs first came along, it kind of took away the wiggle room that drivers had. So if you hit traffic, you could kind of fudge the numbers a little bit on your logbook to make it legal, so that you could still, find parking and everything for the night. Now with the electronic driver logs, you have to park it. If you hit the limit on your hours, unless you're like a local driver, and there's like, obviously exceptions here and there, but for the vast majority of drivers that are under these new mandates, you have to park it. Once you're at hours, you're done for the day. And the next big impact on how much a driver is going to earn per day is going to be limiting how fast they can drive. And not to say that, like, every single day they're going to be earning a little bit less, but when you extrapolate that over like the earnings for the entire year, that's when you start to notice the
Mhm.
difference.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. It's almost like these laws. I think we can, like I said, and we can all agree that drivers should not be working this much or be speeding, and and so on and so forth. But it's almost like we have this system where drivers do have to do that in order to make ends meet, and we're
Hmm.
trying to fix it by hedging them in a little bit through kind of these band-aids, rather than saying, okay, what's going on beneath the surface here? Like, how do we just solve this from the ground up, basically?
Yeah, and then unless rates, start going up, which they won't be because we just have too many drivers out there. So if you're slowing down how many miles they can drive per hour and how many hours a day they can work, and et cetera, unless you're bumping up the rate of their pay, that's going to be a big chunk of their money right there.
Hmm. Hmm. So, if you, Justin, were the head of the FMCSA, or had some sort of stake in this governing body, what would be kind of the first few things you look at, or that you try to solve for?
Short of dismantling it from the ground up, if we're going to leave it in place, I would have to go with start with training better drivers. Don't try to mandate
Mm.
everybody all on the same page, because that's just going to, we're seeing the numbers right now. When ELDs came, when ELDs first were being mandated, we were promised that it was going to bring safety up. We're seeing the opposite here. Now guys have to race the clock to try and beat their hours for the day. I think training is key. You need to start training safer drivers, because if you're mandating this and mandating that, but the quality of driver that's still hitting the road isn't up to snuff, you're not going to see an increase in safety whatsoever.
Hmm. What would be some changes you'd make in training?
There is a big push right now with a lot of guys to try and turn trucking into a trade. The typical career path for a lot of drivers right now is you get hired on a mega carrier that pays for your training, or you take out a loan and go to truck driving school on your own. And then your first job is usually with a mega carrier, and you're driving all over the country. And then once you put your time in, so to speak, you try to find like a nice cushy local job and then ride that out till you're into retirement. Um, our mutual friend Gordon McGill says it needs to be the opposite. New drivers should be starting local, and that way they can stay home, stay in the area. That alone right there will help with turnover right now. So you got guys entering the industry that are now going to be away from their family for days, weeks, months at a time, and within the first couple of days, they're like, "Nope, this isn't for me," and then they're out. They're not just quitting that company and going somewhere else.
Mm.
They're literally quitting the industry. Period. So having a better way of introducing people into the industry and getting their training up to where it needs to be, and then putting them into positions where they can grow into whatever they want to be as a driver. That's I think that's a better approach.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, especially I only recently saw this. The median driver, I think, that's training and entering the industry is in their mid 30s, or it was either their
Yeah.
mid or early 30s. This isn't, someone, right out of college, or obviously can't be right out of high school because of laws that say that you cannot be an interstate driver until you're 21. But someone who's in their, mid, early, late, whatever 30s, they probably already have a family. They already have, these sorts
Hmm.
of things established. They can't just go. They can, of course, but they can't. But I think many of them would prefer to not, go away for weeks at a time, and
Yeah.
especially because it's
I
a challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to joke around a lot that I was like the perfect candidate for being a truck driver. I was in my late 20s, single, didn't have a house, didn't have a car, had
Hmm.
no commitments. I literally had a cell phone bill. That was it. That was my only commitments.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes to show why I was probably the only person still in trucking years later. Within a year and a half, I would say every single person. So when I started, it was 87 of us, I believe, in my CDL school,
Mhm.
and only 17 graduated 2 weeks later. And within a year and a
Wow.
half, I was the only person still driving a truck, not just going to a different company, but literally just driving a truck. Period.
Do you know what the rest of them ended up doing?
Oh, literally anything. One of the the first guy I drove team with, Shane. We still remain good friends today. He became like a bouncer at a club, and then I think he got his helicopter license. He lives in Key West now.
Okay.
Other people, whatever industry they were in before trucking, they kind of came into trucking as like, oh, I'll just give this a shot and see how it goes. And then they were like, nope, this ain't for me. And so now they're back to doing whatever they were doing prior to trucking.
I mean, it makes sense. It's not a job that everyone can do or would
Yeah.
want to do. It does take a specific. They say it takes a specific kind of person, but I mean, when it comes to a local job, I feel like it doesn't really require that same kind of,
No, not
trailblazing,
not at all.
independent kind of guy.
It also depends on how far you're going too, because like the first job I had driving local, I was going from Philadelphia to Ashland, Virginia, and back every day. And so there were still times
Mhm.
where I would start my day at like 5 a.m., get down to Virginia, and by the time I'm coming back that afternoon, there'd be a blizzard in Washington D.C. or something. So I'd be stuck for the day. I have to get a hotel
Mm.
or something nearby. So it's not exactly, even though it's local, considered local, you're still driving 500 plus miles a day, and you can get stuck out there. When I was at the post office, I think my last route with them was 36 miles in my shift, but it was like all center city Philadelphia, like the worst kind of traffic imaginable. Um, but my thinking there was like, God forbid if I'm out there and like something disastrous happens, I'll just take an Uber home. I was never more than like
Yeah.
15 minutes from my house.
Can you tell us? Okay, so we actually, what was I going to ask? I guess I'm curious. What does someone do before they enter truck driving? Because I mentioned the average driver enters in their 30s. You enter in your late 20s. Um, like, what kind of path happens before someone says, "Okay, I'm going to actually become a long haul truck driver now,"
For
or
me, it
even
was
a local truck
desperation. Yeah,
driver?
yeah. For me, it was sheer desperation. I was working retail in South Florida, and I was making like nothing. I was probably making like 13 an hour, I think it was at the time, maybe
Hmm.
12.50. And my parents prior had worked at Schneider for a couple years prior. They'd worked at Schneider for about 8 months. Their plan was they were going to get in the truck, drive team for a while, and do that until they retire because we had friends and family all over the country. And that they lasted, I think, maybe one winter, and they were like, nope, this ain't it. Um,
Wow.
everyone that I was in truck driving school, it was people from like every background imaginable. So this was in October 2007, so just before like the whole banking collapse and everything. It was doctors, lawyers, people that just worked retail, kids who grew up on a farm. You name it. It's a vast majority of different backgrounds, and I don't believe that has changed today. A lot of people, they what I'm seeing now today that's different from back then is social media. So a lot of, if you're on like Facebook or TikTok or
Mm.
YouTube, you'll see these guys and gals on there saying like, "Hey, this is me. This is the day in the life of a driver. This is how much I make." And if you're, not making anywhere near what the truck drivers are making, you thinking to yourself, "Oh, I could probably do that," or at least I want to try to make some of that money. But you're not getting like the whole picture. You're not getting the loneliness of being on the road. If you have a family or commitments that you got to take care of, like it's very stressful. I drove team with a guy for a couple of weeks, and I literally watched his marriage deteriorate over the phone. The
Oh my
first
gosh.
day we went out, within 2 hours, his wife was already calling saying, "Hey, I need you to come back." And he's like, "We stay out a month at a time. Like, I'll see you in 4 weeks."
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I just connecting back to the speed limiter things, a lot of people, a lot of drivers might be driving to, finish up a job to get to the next, drop off the next
Hmm.
load. But a lot of people are just trying to get home. A lot of people haven't seen
Yeah.
their families in weeks or even, upwards of a month. It's not just, people trying to, speed a lot to make more and more money. It's people who are trying to literally just be able to see their families.
Yeah. Imagine
Um,
being 90 miles. Imagine being 90 miles from home and not being able to make it there. That's what ELDs do.
yeah,
Like, if you could drive an extra hour and a half and be home for the weekend and see your friends and family, great. But nowadays, this happens all the time. A driver will get very close to home, and then they run out of hours, and they got to shut down, and they're an hour and a half from the house.
that is so frustrating. It's just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's
So
something
you,
that
you need
definitely,
any
yeah.
plans that you had made, like if there was a holiday party or something going on, it's like, nope, now you're stuck. And God forbid, if it was, say you ran into your 70-hour limit, that's a 34-hour restart that you got to take, not just a 10-hour reset.
Mm. It's just that there's so many. I feel like with ELD specifically, it caused all of this logistical planning that previously you could kind of, if you're 10, 15, whatever minutes over, you can kind of, make things work. Technically it's illegal, but as we
Hmm.
learned in Carrie Levy's book, um
I was just about to
on
reference that book.
data driven about trucking surveillance, breaking the law is something that happens
Yeah.
every day. Like you jaywalk. I jaywalk every
Yep.
day. No, hope if anyone from the New York Police Department is watching, this is a joke. Don't worry. But like people jaywalk. People, speaking of speed limiters, people drive 63 in a 60-mile zone. It's all like it's difficult for me to picture how society would function if it weren't for people kind of fudging the numbers or kind of bending the rules a little bit to be
Yeah.
clear.
Exactly. You're not doing cartwheels down the street, and jamming up traffic and making it so that people can't get by. You're getting across as quickly and conveniently as you can, and then you're out of everybody's way.
Mhm.
And that's where all this electronic surveillance and all these new mandates are coming down. They're taking away that flexibility, and they're going to make it harder for people to get things done, basically.
Yeah. And one last question slash comment before we wrap up the show. I feel like one of the big issues in these trucking laws, and this is something that you see in the FMCSA comments or in interviews or on Twitter or wherever, is this idea that the laws they're good. It makes sense. It makes sense to to limit speed, to limit working hours, but it's the fact that it's applied on everyone. Someone who has
Hmm.
one day of truck driving versus 40 years, millions of
Yes.
miles, accident free. That's another real issue here, and it goes back to your training issue, to your training comment, where if drivers had more experience, if they're better trained, if they stay in the industry for longer, maybe some of these issues around increasing fatalities and accidents wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, part of the problem with turnover is it's not just drivers that are leaving the industry. Those drivers could have gone on to become future trainers. So it's
Yeah.
has absolutely nothing to do with like the birth rate problem, but it's like the same math problem. It's like the fewer people having kids, it's the fewer people that are having kids, and it just the numbers go further and further. So
Yeah.
the fewer drivers that you have sticking around, those are fewer experienced guys that you have that could train the next potential trainers. And it goes all over the supply chain. You're seeing this where COVID I think really, geez, I've always heard COVID was like a great accelerant, and I love that. Um, you can almost compare it to, remember the Cash for Clunkers program, where they took all these like
Oh,
perfectly
yes,
reliable
yes.
used cars off out of the market. Same thing right now with all these mandates and high turnover. I'm thinking of this like right on the spot. High turnover is basically Cash for Clunkers, but for like your workforce. You're pushing people out that could have been around for a long time and had great careers, and that's just going to hurt you even further down the line.
This is a great. I love this. I love this new analogy you've come up with during the show. Well, Justin, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone who tuned in today. You can follow Modes at freightwaves.com/modes for a newsletter. And Justin, where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SuperTrucker. I also run FreightWaves' What the Truck social media accounts, so you can find us at freightwaves.com/What the Truck, and on Twitter at FW What the Truck, and also on TikTok at FW What the Truck.
Oh yeah, the TikTok is a must watch. Okay, thanks guys. We'll see you next week.